Lieutenant Sarah Martinez stood perfectly still as the camera clicked for the 100th time that morning. Her green military uniform was pressed to perfection without a single wrinkle. Her black boots shined like mirrors reflecting the bright studio lights. The photographer kept telling her to smile bigger and look more confident. Sarah wanted to tell him she was already confident, but she just nodded and followed his directions. This was her third photo shoot this month. The Army loved using Sarah for their recruitment campaigns and magazine covers. She had the perfect look they wanted to show the world, young, strong, and beautiful with a bright smile that made military service look appealing to young women across the country. Her commanding officers always praised her for being such a great representative of modern female soldiers. But Sarah knew what the other soldiers really thought about her. She could hear them whispering in the hallways when they thought she was not listening. They called her the show pony soldier. They said she got promoted because she looked good in photographs, not because she earned it. Some of them made jokes about how she spent more time in front of cameras than on the battlefield. The worst part was during training exercises. When Sarah would volunteer for difficult tasks, the other soldiers would laugh and suggest she should stick to photo shoots instead. When she offered tactical advice during briefings, some of the men would roll their eyes and make comments about pretty faces not needing to think too hard. It hurt more than Sarah ever let them see. What none of them knew was that Sarah had scored the highest marks in her entire training class. While they were out drinking beer and complaining about their assignments, Sarah was studying battle tactics and weapon systems. She could take apart and rebuild an assault rifle faster than most men twice her size. Her shooting accuracy scores were better than 90% of the soldiers on base. She could run 5 miles in combat gear without getting winded. Sarah had grown up in a tough neighborhood in Detroit where being pretty could be dangerous if you could not also be strong. Her father had been a Marine who taught her that respect had to be earned through actions, not appearances. He showed her how to fight, how to shoot, and most importantly, how to never give up when people underestimated her. Her mother had been a nurse who worked double shifts to support the family and never complained about being tired. When Sarah joined the Army, she thought her skills would speak for themselves. She imagined earning respect through hard work and dedication, just like her parents had taught her. But the reality was much more complicated. The moment her first official photo appeared in a recruiting brochure, everything changed. Suddenly, everyone saw her as a symbol instead of a soldier. The male soldiers treated her like she was fragile and needed protection during combat training. They would try to carry her heavy equipment or offer to help her with tasks she could easily handle, alone. When Sarah politely refused their help, they got offended and accused her of being ungrateful. When she accepted their help, they said it proved she was not really soldier material. Female soldiers had their own complicated reactions to Sarah. Some were jealous of the attention and opportunities she received. Others felt like her media presence put extra pressure on all women in the military to look perfect all the time. A few became her friends, but most kept their distance to avoid being seen as riding on her popularity. The commanding officers were caught in the middle. They genuinely needed Sarah for public relations because she was excellent at representing the military in a positive way. But they also had to deal with the complaints from other soldiers who felt like she was getting special treatment. Some officers tried to give her easier assignments to protect their investment in her public image. Others went too far in the opposite direction and were extra hard on her to prove they were not playing favorites. Sarah felt trapped in a situation she had never asked for. All she wanted was to be a good soldier and serve her country with honor. Instead, she was stuck being a living advertisement for military diversity while constantly having to prove she deserved to wear the uniform at all. Every morning when she put on her uniform, Sarah looked in the mirror and wondered if she would ever be seen as more than just a pretty face. The photography session finally ended after 4 hours of taking pictures from every possible angle. Sarah changed back into her regular duty uniform and walked across the base toward the barracks. As she passed a group of male soldiers, she heard one of them say that the army should just hire models instead of wasting time training show ponies to be real soldiers. Sarah kept walking without showing any reaction, but inside she felt a familiar fire burning. She had dealt with doubt and disrespect her entire life, but she never let it stop her from pursuing her goals. Her father always told her that actions spoke louder than words, and that the best response to criticism was excellence. Sarah decided it was time to stop worrying about what people thought and start showing them who she really was. That evening, Sarah sat in her small room looking at the stack of military tactical manuals she kept hidden under her bed. While other soldiers were watching television or playing video games, Sarah studied advanced combat strategies and battlefield communications. She memorized weapon specifications and terrain analysis techniques. She was preparing for the day when someone would finally give her a chance to prove herself. Sarah knew that day would come eventually. She just had to be patient and ready when the opportunity arrived. Until then, she would continue smiling for the cameras and letting people think whatever they wanted to think. But when the time came to show her true abilities, Sarah Martinez was going to surprise everyone who had ever called her a show pony soldier. The morning briefing room was packed with soldiers when Colonel Hayes walked in, carrying a thick folder marked with red security tape. Everyone could tell from his serious expression that something big was about to happen. The room fell silent as he moved to the front and placed the folder on the table with a heavy thud that echoed through the space. Sarah sat in the back row as usual, trying to stay invisible while the more experienced soldiers filled the front seats. She watched Colonel Hayes scan the room with his steel-gray eyes before speaking. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of authority that made everyone sit up straighter in their chairs. The mission he described made several soldiers shift uncomfortably in their seats. Enemy forces had established a major weapons cache deep in hostile territory, about 60 miles from the nearest Allied base. Intelligence reports suggested they were planning a massive assault that could overwhelm 3 Allied outposts and cost hundreds of lives. Someone needed to get close enough to gather detailed information about enemy strength and coordinate precision strikes to destroy the weapons before they could be used. The assignment required a single soldier to operate alone behind enemy lines. For at least 72 hours, they would need to move through dangerous terrain without being detected while maintaining radio contact with command. The soldier would have minimal supplies and no backup support if things went wrong. Everyone in the room understood what Colonel Hayes was really saying. This was a suicide mission disguised as a reconnaissance assignment. Captain Rodriguez was the first to speak up. He asked about extraction plans and backup support options. Colonel Hayes explained that the terrain made helicopter extraction impossible during daylight hours, and radio interference would make communication difficult. The chosen soldier would essentially be on their own until the mission was completed, or they were declared missing in action. Sergeant Miller raised his hand and asked about alternative approaches like sending a full squad or using drone surveillance instead. The colonel shook his head and explained that enemy air defenses made drone flights too risky and a larger group would be easier to detect. This mission required someone who could move like a ghost through enemy territory while still being able to coordinate complex military operations. The room grew quieter as the reality of the assignment sank in. This was not just dangerous, it was nearly impossible. Success would require perfect execution of skills that few soldiers possessed. One mistake in navigation could mean getting lost in hostile wilderness. One error in communication could result in friendly fire incidents. One moment of carelessness could lead to capture and interrogation by enemy forces known for their brutal treatment of prisoners. Sarah felt her heart racing as she realized this was exactly the kind of opportunity she had been waiting for. While other soldiers were calculating the risks and finding reasons to avoid volunteering, Sarah was already planning how she could succeed where others might fail. Her small size would make her harder to spot. Her extensive study of tactical manuals had prepared her for exactly this type of operation. Her perfect scores in navigation and communication training suddenly seemed incredibly relevant. Without thinking about the consequences, Sarah raised her hand high in the air. The entire room turned to look at her with expressions ranging from surprise to amusement. Several soldiers started chuckling and whispering to each other about the show pony soldier volunteering for a real combat mission. Captain Rodriguez actually laughed out loud and suggested that Sarah should stick to photo shoots and leave the dangerous work to experienced soldiers. But Sarah was ready for this moment. She stood up and began speaking about the mission requirements, with confidence that surprised everyone in the room. She discussed terrain analysis techniques and explained how weather patterns could affect radio communications. She outlined potential routes through enemy territory and identified likely locations for observation posts based on the intelligence briefing. Her detailed knowledge of battlefield tactics and military procedures slowly silenced the laughter. Sarah continued speaking about extraction protocols and contingency plans with the precision of someone who had spent countless hours studying these exact scenarios. She explained how a smaller soldier could access hiding places that larger team members could not reach, and how her advanced communications training qualified her to coordinate complex operations. Captain Rodriguez stopped smiling and started asking technical questions to test Sarah's knowledge. She answered each question correctly, while providing additional details that showed her deep understanding of military operations. When he asked about weapon maintenance in hostile conditions, Sarah described field stripping procedures that impressed even the veteran sergeants in the room. Colonel Hayes had been watching this exchange with growing interest. Unlike the other officers, he had actually read Sarah's complete service record, including her training scores and performance evaluations. He knew that beneath the pretty face and media attention was a soldier who had consistently outperformed her peers in every measurable category. Her volunteer request was not naive enthusiasm, it was calculated confidence based on genuine ability. The colonel raised his hand to stop the questioning and asked Sarah directly if she understood that this mission had a very low probability of success and survival. Sarah looked him straight in the eye and replied that she understood the risks, but believed her specific skills and training made her the best candidate available. She added that someone had to accept the mission to save the lives of Allied soldiers, who would die if the enemy attack succeeded. After a long moment of silence, Colonel Hayes nodded slowly and announced that Lieutenant Martinez would be given the assignment. The room erupted in protests from other officers who argued that Sarah was too inexperienced and valuable as a public relations asset to risk on such a dangerous mission. But the colonel had made his decision, and his word was final. Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and terror as she realized she had just volunteered for the most dangerous assignment of her military career. This was her chance to prove herself, but it might also be her last chance to prove anything at all. As the briefing ended and other soldiers filed out of the room, many of them gave her looks that seemed to say goodbye forever. But Sarah was not thinking about the danger anymore. She was thinking about the opportunity to finally show everyone who she really was underneath the uniform and the photographs. In 72 hours, the entire military would know whether Lieutenant Sarah Martinez was truly a soldier or just a show pony who had talked her way into a mission she could not handle. The helicopter dropped Sarah into complete darkness at exactly midnight. She felt the cold night air hit her face as she stepped onto the rocky ground 20 miles from her target zone. The aircraft disappeared into the black sky within seconds, leaving behind only the sound of wind through the mountains and her own steady breathing. Sarah was now completely alone in enemy territory with nothing but her training and determination to keep her alive. She carried a lightweight backpack with 3 days of water, energy bars, medical supplies, and her most important piece of equipment, which was a military radio that would be her only connection to Allied forces. Sarah also had her service rifle, night vision goggles, and a detailed map of the region that she had memorized during the flight. Everything else she needed would have to come from her skills and knowledge. The terrain was even more challenging than the briefing had suggested. Sharp rocks and loose gravel made every step dangerous in the darkness. Deep valleys and steep cliffs created natural barriers that forced Sarah to take longer routes than she had originally planned. But her small size became an advantage as she moved through narrow passages and rocky crevices that would have been impossible for larger soldiers to navigate. Sarah had studied this type of landscape for months in preparation for missions exactly like this one. She knew how to read the shadows and use the natural contours of the land to stay hidden. Her father had taught her to move quietly through difficult terrain when they went hunting together during her childhood. Those skills were now keeping her alive as she made her way toward the enemy weapons cache. After 6 hours of careful movement, Sarah reached her first observation point on a ridge overlooking the target area. What she saw through her night vision goggles made her heart sink. The intelligence reports had been completely wrong about the size of the enemy operation. Instead of a simple weapons cache, she was looking at a massive military compound with hundreds of soldiers and enough equipment to supply a full-scale invasion. Enemy vehicles were moving in and out of the compound constantly. Sarah counted at least 50 trucks, 20 armored vehicles, and what appeared to be mobile artillery units that could destroy Allied positions from miles away. Guard towers with searchlights were positioned around the entire perimeter and patrol. Teams were walking regular circuits to watch for intruders. This was not just a weapons storage facility, it was a forward operating base preparing for a major assault. Sarah realized that the planned enemy attack was going to be much worse than anyone had imagined. The intelligence estimates of enemy strength were off by at least 300%. If this force launched their assault as scheduled, the Allied outposts would be completely overwhelmed within hours. Hundreds of soldiers would die unless someone warned them about what was really coming. She spent the next 12 hours moving to different observation points and documenting everything she could see. Sarah made detailed notes about vehicle types, weapon systems, patrol schedules, and defensive positions. She sketched maps showing the layout of the compound and identified the most vulnerable targets for potential airstrikes. Her training in tactical analysis was finally being put to real use in a life-or-death situation. The most disturbing discovery came when Sarah intercepted enemy radio communications. Her language training allowed her to understand enough of their conversations to realize that the assault was scheduled to begin in less than 48 hours. Allied forces thought they had at least a week to prepare their defenses, but the enemy was planning to attack much sooner than expected. Sarah knew she had to get this information back to command immediately, but her radio was having serious problems, with interference from the mountainous terrain. She could hear scattered fragments of Allied communications, but could not establish a clear connection to transmit her findings. Every attempt to send a message resulted in static and broken signals that would not carry her voice back to headquarters. As the second night fell, Sarah found herself in an impossible situation. She had gathered intelligence that could save hundreds of lives, but she could not communicate it to the people who needed to hear it. Enemy patrols were getting closer to her hiding positions, and she would soon be forced to move to avoid capture. But moving away from the target area would make radio communication even more difficult. Sarah decided to take a desperate risk that went against all her training. Instead of staying hidden and trying to establish radio contact from a safe distance, she would move closer to the enemy compound. The higher radio towers and electronic equipment in the base were causing interference, but they might also provide enough signal boost to get her transmission through to Allied forces. This plan meant crawling through areas where enemy sentries could spot her at any moment. It meant getting close enough to the compound that escape would be nearly impossible if she was discovered. But Sarah knew that completing her mission was more important than her personal safety. The lives of her fellow soldiers depended on the intelligence she had gathered. As she prepared to move toward the enemy base, Sarah thought about all the people who had called her a show pony soldier. She wondered what they would think if they could see her now, crawling through hostile territory, with enemy weapons pointed in every direction. This was not about proving herself anymore. It was about doing whatever it took to protect the soldiers who had never believed in her abilities. Sarah checked her equipment one final time and began moving toward the most dangerous part of her mission. In a few hours, she would either successfully warn Allied forces about the coming attack, or she would become another casualty of a war that had already claimed too many lives. Either way, she was determined to show everyone that Lieutenant Sarah Martinez was a real soldier who would never give up when lives were at stake. Sarah crawled through the darkness toward the enemy compound with her heart pounding so hard she worried the guards might hear it. Every few minutes she had to freeze completely when searchlights swept across her position or when she heard footsteps approaching her hiding spot. The rocky ground cut through her uniform and scraped her skin, but she ignored the pain and kept moving forward inch by inch. It took her 3 hours to reach a position close enough to the enemy radio towers where her transmission might get through. Sarah found a small cave between two large boulders that provided cover while giving her a clear line of sight to the sky. She set up her radio equipment with trembling hands, knowing that once she started transmitting, her location would be revealed to anyone monitoring enemy communications. Sarah took a deep breath and keyed her radio using the call sign that had been assigned to her for this mission. Phoenix 7 was a name that meant nothing to anyone yet, but that was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. Her voice was steady and professional as she began transmitting the most important message of her military career. The first person to respond was Major Thompson at the Tactical Operations Center. His voice crackled through the static as he asked Phoenix 7 to repeat the intelligence report because what he was hearing seemed impossible. Sarah calmly repeated her observations about enemy strength and the accelerated timeline for their planned assault. She provided specific coordinates, vehicle counts, and weapon classifications with the precision of someone who had spent days studying every detail. Within minutes, Sarah found herself connected to Colonel Hayes and several other senior officers, who were gathering in the command center to hear her report firsthand. They asked dozens of questions about enemy defensive positions, patrol schedules, and potential targets for counterattacks. Sarah answered each question with detailed information that demonstrated her thorough analysis of the situation. As word spread about the intelligence, Phoenix 7 was providing more and more military personnel joined the communication network. Fighter pilots asked about air defense systems. Artillery commanders wanted coordinates for the most valuable targets. Ground unit leaders requested information about enemy escape routes and reinforcement capabilities. Sarah found herself coordinating with dozens of military specialists simultaneously. What surprised everyone was how much Phoenix 7 seemed to know about advanced military tactics and battlefield coordination. This was supposed to be a simple reconnaissance mission, but Phoenix 7 was providing strategic analysis that usually came from experienced field commanders. The voice on the radio spoke with authority about combined arms operations, target prioritization, and tactical timing that impressed veteran officers. Sarah realized that this was the moment she had been preparing for her entire military career. All those nights studying tactical manuals were now paying off as she helped coordinate what would become one of the most complex military operations in recent history. Her small size and hidden position gave her a perfect view of the entire enemy compound, while her radio provided real-time intelligence to Allied forces preparing their response. The first airstrike came exactly 40 minutes after Sarah made initial contact with command. She watched through her night vision goggles as precision-guided missiles destroyed the enemy fuel depot in a massive explosion that lit up the entire valley. Secondary explosions from stored ammunition created a chain reaction that eliminated nearly half of the enemy vehicles before they could be moved to safety. Enemy soldiers ran in every direction trying to organize a response to the sudden attack. But Phoenix 7 was already calling in coordinates for the next wave of strikes. Sarah directed Allied aircraft to target communication towers, weapons storage areas, and command bunkers with surgical precision that maximized damage while minimizing the risk to friendly forces. For the next 18 hours, Sarah remained in, her hiding spot coordinating one of the most successful tactical operations anyone could remember. She guided fighter bombers to their targets, helped artillery units adjust their fire for maximum effectiveness, and provided real-time intelligence about enemy movements and defensive preparations. Enemy commanders tried desperately to locate Phoenix 7 by using radio direction, finding equipment, and sending patrol teams to search the surrounding area. But Sarah had chosen her position carefully and knew how to minimize her electronic signature while still maintaining contact with Allied forces. Every time enemy soldiers came close to her location, she would stop transmitting until they moved away. The tactical situation that had seemed hopeless just days before was now turning into a complete victory for Allied forces. Enemy supply lines were cut off, their heavy weapons were destroyed, and their planned assault was in complete chaos. What should have been a devastating attack on Allied positions became a rout that pushed enemy forces back by dozens of miles. Throughout the entire operation, Phoenix 7 demonstrated tactical brilliance that amazed everyone listening to the radio communications. Experienced pilots found themselves following the recommendations of someone they had never met because those recommendations consistently led to successful missions with minimal risk. Ground commanders requested Phoenix 7 input on their operational plans because the intelligence was so accurate and valuable. Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment and pride that she had never experienced before. For the first time in her military career, she was being judged purely on her abilities and performance, rather than her appearance or media presence. The respect she heard in the voices of soldiers working with Phoenix 7 was the validation she had always wanted. But Sarah also knew that her mission was far from over. Enemy forces were regrouping and trying to salvage what they could from their destroyed compound. Allied forces needed to maintain pressure to prevent the enemy from recovering and launching future attacks. Phoenix 7 would need to continue providing intelligence and coordination support until the tactical situation was completely stabilized. As dawn broke over the mountains, Sarah realized she had been awake and operating under extreme stress for more than 36 hours. Her water was running low and her radio batteries were starting to weaken. But she had proven something important to herself and to everyone who had ever doubted her capabilities. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez was not just a show pony soldier, she was Phoenix 7, a tactical coordinator whose skills could change the outcome of entire military campaigns. The legend of Phoenix 7 was just beginning, but Sarah had no idea how famous that call sign was about to become. Word about Phoenix 7 spread through military communications networks like wildfire. Within hours of the successful operation, pilots and ground commanders across the region were talking about the mysterious tactical coordinator who had orchestrated one of the most brilliant battlefield victories in recent memory. Everyone wanted to know who Phoenix 7 was and how someone could demonstrate such exceptional military skill. The Tactical Operations Center received dozens of requests from field commanders asking if Phoenix 7 could provide support for their missions. Senior officers who had never worked with the unknown coordinator were reviewing recordings of the radio communications, trying to understand how one person had managed such complex battlefield coordination. Military analysts were studying the operation as a perfect example of how intelligence and tactical planning could overcome superior enemy numbers. Major Thompson started keeping a detailed log of every recommendation Phoenix 7 made during combat operations. The accuracy rate was almost perfect, and the tactical insights consistently exceeded what experienced field commanders typically provided. Fighter pilots reported that following Phoenix 7 guidance resulted in successful missions with minimal risk and maximum effectiveness against enemy targets. But the most remarkable development was happening on the enemy side of the conflict. Intelligence intercepts revealed that enemy commanders had become obsessed with identifying and eliminating Phoenix 7. They recognized that this single coordinator had been responsible for destroying their planned offensive and turning what should have been a major victory into a devastating defeat. Enemy radio communications showed increasing panic whenever Phoenix 7 was detected coordinating Allied operations. Some enemy units reported receiving orders to retreat immediately if they heard Phoenix 7 transmissions in their area. Intelligence analysts noted that certain enemy commanders refused to engage in operations if they believed Phoenix 7 might be providing tactical support to Allied forces. Sarah remained in the field for 3 more weeks, conducting additional reconnaissance missions and providing tactical coordination for ongoing operations. Each successful mission added to the Phoenix 7 legend, while Sarah herself remained completely anonymous. She preferred it this way because for the first time in her military career, she was being evaluated purely on her performance rather than her appearance. The call sign Phoenix 7 became associated with tactical excellence and operational success throughout the entire theater of operations. Young officers studied transcripts of Phoenix 7 radio communications to learn advanced battlefield coordination techniques. Veteran commanders requested Phoenix 7 support for their most challenging missions because they knew the quality of intelligence and tactical guidance they would receive. Sarah discovered that operating as Phoenix 7 gave her a freedom she had never experienced before. Without the burden of being recognized as the show pony soldier, she could focus entirely on doing her job to the best of her abilities. The respect and admiration she heard in the voices of soldiers working with Phoenix 7 was exactly what she had always hoped to earn through her military service. During one particularly difficult operation, Sarah found herself coordinating strikes against an enemy convoy that was transporting weapons to reinforce a strategic position. The mission required perfect timing between air support, artillery fire, and ground unit movements. Phoenix 7 guided each element of the operation with precision that resulted in complete destruction of the enemy convoy without any Allied casualties. The success of this mission led to Phoenix 7 being requested specifically by name for future operations. Field commanders would ask tactical operations centers if Phoenix 7 was available to provide support before they would approve certain high-risk missions. The unknown coordinator had become so valuable that some operations were delayed until Phoenix 7 could be assigned to provide tactical guidance. Enemy forces developed increasingly desperate tactics trying to locate and eliminate Phoenix 7. They used radio direction finding equipment, deployed special reconnaissance teams, and even offered rewards for information about the mysterious coordinator. But Sarah had become expert at operating from hidden positions while maintaining effective communication with Allied forces. Intelligence reports showed that enemy morale was being significantly affected by the Phoenix 7 phenomenon. Soldiers, who had previously been confident about their military capabilities, were now afraid to engage in operations where they might face the tactical genius who had destroyed so many of their previous efforts. Some enemy units requested transfers to different regions to avoid potentially encountering Phoenix 7. Sarah realized that she had accidentally created a psychological weapon that was as effective as any physical military equipment. The reputation of Phoenix 7 had grown to the point where the mere possibility of facing this coordinator was enough to make enemy forces reconsider their operational plans. This was military influence that went far beyond what any single soldier typically achieved. The most satisfying aspect of the Phoenix 7 legend for Sarah was seeing how it changed the attitudes of Allied soldiers toward tactical coordination and battlefield intelligence. Young soldiers who had previously considered reconnaissance work boring were now volunteering for intelligence assignments, hoping to develop skills like Phoenix 7. Military schools started teaching Phoenix 7 tactics as examples of exceptional battlefield coordination. But Sarah also knew that her anonymous success as Phoenix 7 would eventually come to an end. Military operations could not continue indefinitely, and she would eventually have to return to her regular duties and her identity as Lieutenant Sarah Martinez. She wondered how people would react when they discovered that the legendary Phoenix 7 was the same person they had dismissed as a show pony soldier. The irony was not lost on Sarah that she had finally achieved the respect and recognition she had always wanted, but only while hiding behind a call sign that concealed her true identity. She had proven her capabilities beyond any doubt, but the people who had doubted her still did not know they had been proven wrong. As her extended field assignment neared its end, Sarah prepared herself for the revelation that would shock everyone who had worked with Phoenix 7. She had no idea whether the respect she had earned as Phoenix 7 would transfer to Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, or whether people would feel deceived when they learned the truth about her identity. But Sarah was no longer the same person who had stood for photographs and worried about what other soldiers thought of her. She had become Phoenix 7 in more than just name, and that transformation had given her confidence that could never be taken away. Whatever happened when she revealed her identity, Sarah knew that she had proven herself as a soldier in the most demanding circumstances possible. The legend of Phoenix 7 was about to meet the reality of Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, and everyone involved was going to be surprised by what they discovered. Sarah walked across the base toward the main briefing room after 4 weeks in the field operating as Phoenix 7. Her uniform was dusty and worn from extended combat operations, but she felt more confident than ever before in her military career. She had proven her abilities under the most challenging circumstances possible and earned respect from soldiers across the entire region. The briefing room was packed with officers and enlisted personnel who were attending a special presentation about the Phoenix 7 operations. Sarah slipped in through the back door and found a seat in the last row where she could observe without being noticed. She listened with quiet satisfaction as senior commanders discussed the tactical brilliance that Phoenix 7 had demonstrated. During recent combat missions, Captain Rodriguez was standing at the front of the room explaining to a group of new recruits how Phoenix 7 had revolutionized their understanding of battlefield coordination and intelligence gathering. He described the perfect timing of airstrikes and the precision of target selection that had made recent operations so successful. The same officer who had laughed at Sarah for volunteering for the reconnaissance mission was now using her work as an example of military excellence. Major Thompson was showing detailed maps of the operations that Phoenix 7 had coordinated while explaining how one person had managed such complex tactical coordination. He praised the unknown soldier. Tactical knowledge and ability to work effectively with multiple military units simultaneously. Every officer in the room was impressed by the analysis of Phoenix 7 capabilities and achievements. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and anticipation as she listened to the detailed discussion of her accomplishments. These were the same people who had dismissed her as a show pony soldier just weeks earlier. Now they were studying her tactical methods and praising her battlefield performance without knowing they were talking about Lieutenant Sarah Martinez. Colonel Hayes stood up to address the room and announced that he had important information to share about Phoenix 7. He explained that the mysterious coordinator who had become legendary throughout the military was actually present in the briefing room at that moment. Every head in the room turned to look around, trying to identify the tactical genius they had all been praising. Several officers started whispering to each other, trying to guess which of their colleagues might be Phoenix 7. Some looked at the senior commanders, thinking it must be someone with extensive combat experience. Others examined the younger officers, wondering if Phoenix 7 might be a rising star they had not yet recognized. Nobody was looking at the back row where Sarah sat quietly watching their reactions. Colonel Hayes raised his hand for silence and asked Phoenix 7 to please stand up and identify themselves. The room became completely quiet as everyone waited to see who would reveal themselves as the legendary coordinator. Sarah felt her heart racing as she realized this was the moment that would change everything about how her fellow soldiers saw. Sarah stood up slowly and said in a clear voice that she was Phoenix 7. The silence that followed was so complete that she could hear the ventilation system running and papers rustling as people turned to look at her. The expressions on the faces around the room ranged from complete shock to confusion to what appeared to be anger at being fooled. Captain Rodriguez looked like someone had told him that gravity was optional. His mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to ask if Sarah was serious about claiming to be Phoenix 7. When she confirmed that she had been operating under that call sign for the past 4 weeks, his face turned red with embarrassment at all the praise he had given to someone he had previously dismissed. Major Thompson immediately started asking technical questions about specific operations to verify Sarah's claim. She answered each question with precise details about tactical decisions, timing considerations, and coordination challenges that only Phoenix 7 could have known. Her responses demonstrated beyond any doubt that Lieutenant Sarah Martinez and the legendary Phoenix 7 were the same person. Some officers seemed angry that they had been deceived into praising someone they had not respected before. Others appeared embarrassed about their previous treatment of Sarah and the assumptions they had made about her capabilities. A few looked genuinely impressed that the show pony soldier had proven herself to be one of the most capable tactical coordinators they had ever encountered. The reaction from enlisted personnel was mixed, but generally more positive than the officer response. Many of the soldiers had been impressed by Phoenix 7's performance during combat operations and were willing to give Sarah credit for her accomplishments, regardless of their previous opinions. Some admitted that they had completely misjudged her abilities and apologized for their earlier behavior. Colonel Hayes addressed the room and explained that Lieutenant Martinez had volunteered for an extremely dangerous mission when nobody else was willing to accept the assignment. He described her exceptional performance during the reconnaissance operation and her tactical coordination during subsequent combat missions. The colonel made it clear that Sarah had earned her recognition through demonstrated excellence rather than any special treatment. The transformation in how people treated Sarah was immediate and dramatic. Officers who had previously made jokes about photo shoots now asked for her tactical advice and input on operational planning. Soldiers who had dismissed her as a publicity tool now requested her involvement in their missions because they knew the quality of support Phoenix 7 could provide. Sarah found herself assigned to increasingly important and challenging missions where her tactical skills could make the greatest difference. The same commanders who had once suggested she should stick to recruiting events now competed to have her assigned to their operations. Her tactical analyses became required reading for officers throughout the command structure. The most satisfying aspect of the revelation for Sarah was seeing how it changed attitudes toward women in combat roles throughout the military. Young, female soldiers who had been struggling with doubt about their own capabilities now had a clear example of someone who had overcome prejudice and proven herself through exceptional performance. Sarah became a mentor and inspiration rather than just a poster girl, but the greatest victory for Sarah was personal rather than professional. She had finally proven to herself and everyone else that Lieutenant Sarah Martinez was a soldier whose abilities matched her determination and dedication. The show pony soldier had become Phoenix 7, and Phoenix 7 had shown everyone what real military excellence looked like. Sarah still participated in recruiting events and public relations activities, but now she did so as a decorated combat veteran whose tactical achievements spoke louder than any photograph. When young women asked her about military service, she could share stories about real combat operations rather than just posing for cameras and smiling at public events. The call sign, Phoenix 7, became permanently associated with Sarah and followed her throughout the rest of her military career. Enemy forces continued to retreat when they heard that Phoenix 7 was coordinating Allied operations. Allied commanders continued to request her tactical support for their most challenging missions. The legend that had started with a reconnaissance mission nobody wanted had transformed a dismissed show pony soldier into one of the most respected tactical coordinators in the entire military. Sarah Martinez had proven that determination, skill, and courage were more important than appearances or assumptions. She had shown everyone that heroes could come in any form and that true military excellence was measured by actions rather than expectations.